6 o'clock, I'm calling this meeting of the Mazomanie Village Board to order. The meeting was properly posted on January 18th. Roll call.
Harrop.
Here.
Beal. Here. Dearson.
Here.
Mickelson.
Here.
Sander.
Here.
Schlamp.
Here.
Springstead.
Here.
We have a quorum, so we will conduct business. I especially want to welcome Chief Geisler to the meeting this evening, who was just named Firefighter of the Year by the Wisconsin State Fire Chiefs Association. Item 4, additions or corrections to the agenda. If you have none, is there a motion to approve the agenda? Yeah. By Ray.
Second.
By Natalie. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, same sign. That motion is carried. Item 5, approve the minutes from the last regular board meeting.
Under new business on the second page, on the hunting, trapping at Lake Marion. The third sentence down, we start with Mark Geisler feels that a few things need to be decided on regarding the nuisance abatement fees, okay? And then the next sentence starts out, the Sportsman's Club and the village can work together. I would suggest that we add Geisler also feels or something like that, because in the next, that makes it sound like the village is saying that, when it actually it's somebody else's opinion. And the next one that says Gary Harrop feels.
That's a good point. I want to take you back then to item 8 on the first page, Village Administrator's Report. We're talking about property owners being notified sometime after the board approves the list for possible buyouts with regard to flood mitigation. The village engineer is working on the list. The list will then go to people who were involved with the flooding. Then the list will go to the board for approval. Obviously, we're doing this the other way. The board is being brought these names for approval. The list will then go to a letter will then go to the people who were involved in the flooding and who were on the buyout list.
I guess I took it as the people that were, I thought that was like Brian, Peter, like they were gonna meet first, and then they were the ones that were going to present the list to the board. And then it would go to the flood affected.
Mark, Peter, and I met with Ryan and our flood consultant for our final meeting last week, and we're presenting that list that's recommended by the flood consultant and the village engineer tonight to the village board.
Yeah, and that's how I took it, instead of that the list will then go to the people involved in the flooding and then to the board for approval. I guess I took that as it was going to go to yourself, you know, Brian, et cetera, and then.
No, I didn't read it that way. I think just clarify that a little, Sue, if you
Yeah,
would.
okay.
Okay. With those changes, are there anything more that needs to be discussed? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
By Jerry, second by Jeff. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed by the same sign. That motion's carried. Item 8, Village Administrator Report is in writing. Questions? Hearing none, let's move on to item 9, Deputy in Charge Report. Josh.
Good evening. Thanks for letting me switch dates for this month. Numbers are in front of you there. Lower call volumes, but more citations than we've had in the last few months. Month of December is usually historically pretty low for calls, right now, a whole lot going on. One highlight for the month, the Northwest Dane Cares Coalition that established about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. We held another Narcan training down in Cross Plains. Last year it had about 10 people. This year it was over 35, so that group is really growing. It's getting its name out there. Good benefit for the community. Narcan training, and they also gave away Narcan at that time to help fight the opioid epidemic. Next meeting, next month, Deputy Feller will actually be training with me that night, so I'll be able to introduce you all to him. And then shortly after that, he'll be taking over as a second
job, Josh, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 10, Public Works Report is in writing in front of you. Are there any questions for Mark? Hearing none, we're going to move on to item 11, report on Vanguard Commission update.
And it did meet this month.
We meet, okay. Item 12, update on Dane, Iowa Wastewater Commission.
Okay, we met on the 17th. Two big things in discussion is with the debt coming off the books in May and June, what is going to be done with the money that has been used to pay off the debt. We do want to, Dane, Iowa wants to build up some capital, but at the same point, they don't want to have an excessive amount. They want to be able to give this back to the communities. So that right now is the beginning stages to find out exactly what is a good amount to have on hand as opposed to having too much. The other discussion was about Arena Cheese is looking into discharging into the system. We were asked by the Village of Arena to find out how much it would cost to do an engineering study, to find out how much of a significant industrial discharger they'd be and what kind of connection fees they'd have. So we've got that from our engineer, and we're waiting on the Village of Arena to ask us if they want us to do the study or not, would be the next step. And then Dane, Iowa bills the Village of Arena, and then what Village of Arena does with it is up to them. More than likely, they will probably charge Arena Cheese for that, similar to what we did with Cardinal. So those are the two big things from Dane, Iowa.
Questions of Peter on Dane, Iowa? Moving on to item 13, update on EMS. The biggest issue with EMS these days is we're dealing with an older ambulance. The new ambulance doesn't come until June, and so there seem to be a lot of repairs these days. Although we are on track to have the projected amount of money available in the fund by the time the ambulance arrives, so we're keeping our fingers crossed that we paid the last $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 bill for repairs. So that's EMS. Lake Marion update. Water's pouring in yet? Shut it off.
Lake's full. Nothing else to report.
And it's staying full. That's why you're Fire Chief of the Year. Item 15, update on Mazo 2020 committee.
We meet on Thursday.
Okay, so we'll have a report at the next meeting. Item 16, violations of property ordinance.
Nate is still working with one property owner on a vehicle that's there. They're working with Rawhide to pick it up. He had issued some citations, but all of those fell in line with the ordinance then. And we didn't have, the one that we thought we were gonna tow after the last meeting didn't have to be towed. It got taken care of on its own.
Okay. Questions of Peter? Item 17, flood update, and this would be exclusive of the buyout program. Anything we need to discuss?
Well, it's in Mark's and my, both of our reports, working with him on the public assistance side right now, pulling together all the reports and the data that they're requesting.
And the deadline for that is?
It's 2 months after we met with him last week, but our project manager is hoping to have this done hopefully in 6 weeks.
And this is for reimbursement of the roughly $200,000 of expenses that the village incurred during the
Correct.
flood. Okay.
Each function that we participated in through the recovery is a project that has quite a paper trail to be attached.
I bet it is. Thank you, fellas. Item 18, we have no old business, I'm sorry. So we're going to move right into item 19, new business. We we have the 2017 Compliance Maintenance Annual Report on the Sue, explain it.
This is for the sewer utility. It's a report that's required by the DNR each year that demonstrates what we've done with ordinances, budgetary, management, system maintenance. Just basically is a document that shows that we're doing something.
And our grade on that was?
I don't know what the.
I think it was an A. I think it's set up to always be an A. No.
Okay. Because the majority of the sewer function for the village is handled by Dane, Iowa, so we simply maintain the laterals.
Not necessarily, there's a fair amount of energy spent in maintaining our mains.
I don't mean to minimize that, but as Sue said, it's set up to essentially give an A every year. Good job.
The village board does need to approve it.
We need approval on the CMAR report.
Motion approved.
By Jeff,
Second.
by Ray. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed by the same sign. That motion is carried. Okay, we have two operator licenses to approve, one for Lori Joe Sorensen, and one for Carol Lynn Kroll.
Make a motion to approve.
By Natalie, second by Les. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed by the same sign. Motion is carried. Okay, item 3. Discuss potential acquisition of property in floodway for flood mitigation plan, and I want to emphasize floodway here. Just so everyone is on the same page, most of you know that the village hired a flood consultant late last year. This flood consultant has been working with communities in Wisconsin for the last 40 years, especially in the area of FEMA funding and funding assistance to these villages. In conjunction with the village's engineer, Town and Country Engineering in Middleton, we asked our village engineer and the FEMA consultant to present to the board a plan for the buyout of properties within the floodway in the village, within the floodway of the village, that would create a path of least resistance once structures were torn down, so that water would flow along that path and mitigate property damage to other structures, other residential properties on either side of that waterway. One of the first things our flood consultant told us is, you as a board have an obligation to purchase only a minimum number of properties so that you maintain the tax base in the community as best you can and preserve the users of utility services, water, sewer, and electric. So don't get hog wild with buying properties. You're buying properties to mitigate future flood damage, and essentially what we're dealing with tonight, folks, is a buyout of 7 proposed properties and not a bailout. So I know there's gonna be some disappointed people here tonight. We're not gonna be buying every flood damaged home in the community. We're going to make offers to purchase a certain number, 7, is what our consultant and our village engineer are recommending for purchase to mitigate future floodwaters, future flood damage. So with that as a background, Peter, you've got a couple of handouts. Let's hand those out to the board first, and then we'll put the map up on the screen. And I'm gonna ask you to point out these properties that are being recommended for buyout. Now, this buyout, folks, we'll make initial application with FEMA sometime in March. Sometime in September, Peter?
Pardon?
Sometime in September, FEMA would tell us that we've been approved and we submit a more
That's around the
detailed-
time we're guessing. Right now, they're running way behind.
Okay, so funding for this, if the village is approved, will not come in for a year, minimum a year from now. So we're talking a longer-term process here.
I have a question, Gary. So does the grant that we're applying for stipulate that they must be in the floodway? Or is that a decision that the team has made?
That is a recommendation that the village's flood consultant and the village engineer have jointly made to this board.
To only pursue in the floodway?
In the floodway, that's correct. So Peter, here is the list of properties, and let's start at the corner of Kramer and East Hudson. We're talking the Craig Booth property. We're talking the, I think the Van Horn property.
Yeah.
Which is that first one. We're talking the Hook property. We're talking the Olson property. Now that big area immediately behind those three properties, Peter, point to that outlot B. That big area is in the floodplain, can't be built on. There are no structures there at present. Moving on, we're talking about the Patsy Hendren house on Curtis Street. We're talking the Droster house. We're talking the Peterson house and the Noggle house. These people will be notified via letter if the board approves this. They have no obligation to sell. This is their own choice. If they choose, if anyone in there chooses not to sell to the village, there are two alternates listed, the Tice property and the Frank Wolf property. This is the typical flood path. Those that have experienced this in the past, the normal floods, this is a typical path that floodwaters follow. I asked the question of our village engineer, are we looking at ditching? Are we looking at creating a big ditch along that floodway to further force waters down there? His response was, this is a first step. We see how this works. We may go to ditching. We may end up purchasing more properties down the road. But this should be the first response for the village, is offering a buyout to these 7 property owners. So we have a letter prepared. This has been reviewed by the flood consultant and by the village engineer, which would go to these 7 property owners if the board approves this first stage in this flood mitigation plan.
I got a couple questions about the map, including 118 Curtis Street. Are you able to point that out, Peter? It's right next to the buyout
right,
for
this one
Dolores
here, yep.
Hutchinson.
Yep.
I mean, there's areas here that come so close to that floodway. Does it make sense for us, we're gonna offer to buy out Hutchinson's place, but not 118 that occurred the same, if not more damage? and that is directly in that path, like, why wouldn't that end up as an alternate?
Mind if I answer that one?
Please.
I have one other one too, and you maybe can answer both of them at
Okay.
the same time. On Hudson Street, would be 118 Hudson Street. It's in the path, or it's right along that line of
Which one is
everybody else
118?
you're offering buyouts, but then it stops there when part of their property is in that floodway.
Which one is 118? I don't have numbers on this one, so I don't know.
It would be 4 sets.
So it's this one here.
I mean, there's so many of these properties, and they were so questionable as we were doing these
Is the
maps.
house in the floodway? Is the residence in the floodway?
I understand, but you know, as we're talking about the best interests of the village, does it make sense for us to say, okay, 4 sets you can elevate and causing, and then that causing damage to, you know, additional properties around them? Or does it make sense, you know, I mean, they're right next to Bartlett's, et cetera.
Again, we retain these people, they have expertise in this, this is their recommendation.
I'm just wondering about the alternate list, I guess, like why, like for instance, Tice's, their home is not in the floodway, but their outbuilding is in the floodway. But it's such a matter of interpretation, and it has been from day one on that map. I mean, so to me, I don't know, I guess I'm not understanding the alternate list. I think there should probably be more. If you look at the beginning list, what if we have 4 of them that don't accept the buyout? Are we able to then put in 4 alternates? Have we done the math in saying that the 7 is what we can afford to lose? Is that,
We don't know the math
Calculated in
yet,
this?
but using some reasonable estimates, 87.5% of the cost of the buyouts will be borne by the federal and state government. 12.5% will be the cost to the village. Now let's say that we're dealing with $1 million in buyouts here. The village would have expense of $125,000. The village does not have a lot of capacity for additional borrowing right now. We're gonna take a hit come this year in our assessed valuation because of all the damage that's been done in the northeast portion of the village. And of course, we're budgeting to have our village assessor come in and relook at the value on these properties. We're already gonna take a hit on this, Natalie.
agreed, but aren't we already gonna take a hit if they walk? We have to take on the expense of returning their bulldozing that property, returning it to a sellable property.
We may not do that.
So we would just leave like a decrepitated house standing.
No, not necessarily. There are a number of possibilities. First of all, Dale Clemmy, the flood consultant, is saying in another funding period, the village could go in and request additional funds to help people raise their properties. Additional funds to help people raise their properties. There are some that have already walked away from their homes. And yes, the village is going to be dealing with that. Maybe we can go to the lender and make arrangements to take this property back now before we have to pay taxes on it, before we have to reimburse the county for taxes. People that have walked away from these houses will have to deal with that in 3 years. We're going to be, as a village, we're going to be paying a fair amount of money for quite some years to recover from this.
I guess I look at, okay, just keeping in mind the future of allowing people to, like you say, elevate. If you look at Finch Street, next to Rosinko's, when we allowed them to elevate, what did that do to the surrounding properties in a smaller flood than this, in this flood?
Yeah, no question.
You know, so I've,
I
you know,
We
I,
had a pooling right in the middle.
Actually, I have,
both of our walls.
Yeah, we have
I,
video on
I
that.
actually have a letter from,
Myers when that happened in 2007, and I can show it to you. It says,
What I wanna know is how you, I know it's the flood, I see how you picked, because you say the floodway.
that didn't make
But
sense.
most of those houses people are actually living in,
Mhm.
so you all know that, so that's a good pick for you guys to pick,
Yeah.
those houses.
What about us
So,
that can't
yeah,
go
the
back into
people
our
that,
houses still?
I mean, I feel like you don't even know. You guys, I know that you think Mom's house looks great from the outside, it does, it's very sad. An engineer told us it was unstable to be in, we have, you know, proof of that. They said, that, we have the FEMA engineer told us, it's not worth you even fixing it, so that's why we did not go in and fix it.
Right,
That's why nothing's been done at that site.
right.
It just seems the cart before the horse to not have contacted any of these people to even see if they would be willing,
I am upset.
if there was,
And then their property tax, how did their value go up?
My property,
Property
my
value went up.
market value on my house went up $6,000, and my land value went up $4,000.
Because they gotta get money back.
And I, you know, I took the insurance check, I thought I was
I
supposed
don't know how
to,
the force.
because it said, you know, I didn't know, if I would have known that these things were coming out, maybe I wouldn't have paid off my house. But I paid off the house with the insurance money, I thought I was doing the good thing, and, you know, I don't know what.
I just
Well,
wonder
your,
how
your
the-
property,
how you
your
assess-
property, Deb, is going to be reassessed.
Well, why, but it went up, the market value went up,
Well,
and that's never happened before, so I
We're
was.
not looking for a
I'm
bio,
talking,
we're looking
I'm
for
talking for
somebody to
twenty
push the property
nineteen.
down.
Right,
I'm talking
right,
for
I know.
2019, Deb. The assessor is going to be in, they're gonna look at your house, they're gonna say, it isn't worth what it was in 2018. Okay?
We'll just take it down.
That's what we're waiting.
So if we get an elevation certificate done,
Yep.
and it was my understanding that we're at the same elevation as those 2 empty lots in Jim Olson. So how are we not considered part of that, if we're at the same elevation? I
Again,
know the maps have always been wrong, because it always showed us out, but I got the certificate to prove that we're in. And if I'm at the same elevation that they are, I mean, I don't care what the map says, the certificate says we're at that same elevation, so how do we not get counted?
from the beginning, we've been taking those elevation certificates as, that's the end all.
And I'm below that
Can I
elevation
say
across the
something?
street. I'm not in there.
In 2016, my mortgage lender said, because that's when I went back into the floodway, because, so what happened is that Tony Walker was actually across the street at Al's Wiffles, and I flagged him down and I said, hey, can you come over and, you know, look at my lot? And he said, I can't, their lot is low. Your lot is lower than theirs. I would not even shoot an elevation certificate for you because your lot's too low. He said if that creek floods, that water's gonna come down Finch Street and your first floor is gonna flood. He told me that 3 years ago. And also in that letter from Warren Myers, it does say in there, with rain garden, and it did work. It didn't work for the flood, but it worked for when it rains. But, so the other thing is that it said within a 10-year, which it's been 2007, so that's 11, that, the water would, pool on 109 Finch Street versus the 107. Because before that even happened, that was the pooling point for the whole area. And it did say that it would affect my property. And I know it wouldn't have helped because of the flood. But what I'm saying is that for the other people that you're letting raise, please make sure that there is a water irrigation plan. Because that was not put in, and there was a new building code that was written because of me, which was violated me. You know, and I didn't even want to think about all that stuff because it just makes me go back to the panic and having, if you saw these pictures and what happened,
sense either, Deb.
It's never, I know, but what I'm saying is, I know,
My house,
but it,
my house has been flooded, all three of the big floods, that same wall has been blown out all three times. However, it comes back at 30-something% damaged by the village, and my insurance says it's like 75% damaged. I can't get a general contractor to actually even look at my house because they know that the insurance company's involved. I'm dead in the water. I can't do anything with it. All I can do is drive by and look at it rotting away.
There are no winners in this. None. Not even the people that are getting buyouts. There are no winners.
Okay, so explain this to me. The Booth house,
Yep,
which is right next door, is on that list,
yep,
but mine's not in the floodway.
correct.
But Booth's only outbuildings in the floodway, their primary structure's not in the floodway either, correct?
Correct.
Right.
So I don't, that's what I'm not
So
understanding.
the other houses that are in the same situation then?
There's several houses that are like that, and it's so interpretable on that map.
And you guys realize that half of that block does not live there
Yeah,
anymore, right?
it's so dark.
It's,
I'm kind of surprised that you had an engineer on this committee who would look at this map, and if he did any field work, just walking the neighborhoods, he would realize that some of that map is faulty. For instance, our property there, according to the map, is in the floodway. Just to the west of us in the street, it shows it's in the flood fringe, which means the street is higher than our property, which obviously is not true. And the same thing with looking at our property versus the Noggle property. The Noggle house is in the flood fringe. Our house is in the floodway. Our house is higher than the Noggle house. You can see that every time it's flooded. Up until this last flood, they've been walking in their kitchen in water, and we've only had water pooling around the house. So I think making decisions based on a faulty map is maybe not the best thing to do.
And I think it's concerning that you said that these are all in the floodway, and I'm looking at Noggles is not in the floodway, and so if you're gonna start considering people in the flood fringe, I'm looking at just knowing what's going on out there. We have 34 in the floodplain, there's 8 in the floodway. I see on this list, in the floodplain, and this is my interpretation, that there's 10 to 12 that would consider a buyout. And I don't understand why we're being so exclusive to floodway, but then turning around and there's several properties that are not in the floodway. We've been looking out for the best interests of these people since the beginning. Let's keep doing it. I mean, I'm proud of where we're coming from, right? So we have to keep the best interests. I know we can't have Christmas for everybody, but they have valid points here.
No
They're
question.
looking at an interpretation of the floodway on that map. And I'm gonna point out again, Forst's place, the Wells's place. I mean, if you take a magnifying glass to that map, maybe you see there's part of it's in the floodway.
No,
Whose interpretation
we're
is
20
it?
feet from their
That's what I
house.
mean,
But,
the
yeah.
people that can't live in their houses aren't in
I
this.
mean,
we're the ones that are,
We spent 10 years in the floodplain. We were taken out of the floodplain for a couple years, which dropped our insurance. We had seen a 100-year flood. We made a calculated decision based on our financial, abilities at the time. A year and a half later, here comes this flood. We're probably gonna get put back in the floodplain now. And here we are sitting 20 feet outside of the structure, their structure. We had the same amount of water. I mean, there's no difference. We're surrounded on 3 sides by, is there an appeals process? How does this work going forward?
And I would say too, FEMA's ultimate goal is to remove them from the floodplain, not just from the floodway. I mean, can't we put in a wish list and see where we land here? Like I said, some of these people probably aren't even interested in a buyout.
They might not be, and that's their choice, but the consideration is if the 2 houses in front of them are removed and they're the only house standing there, taking the full brunt of the floodwaters coming through, that's something they've got to consider.
Well, the water comes down Finn Street and hits the front of our house, we can't even open up the door, it was hitting our house so hard. I mean, so that doesn't sound fringe to me, that sounds like I was in a direct path of it.
Pete,
He
Mark,
said Finch Street,
Pete,
my
Mark,
house, Finch Street, Hudson.
routine,
That's a direct
now,
path.
now, first of all, and let us make this distinction, and this is what both the consultant and the engineer are saying. We cannot protect property owners from the type of flood we had in August. We can't do that.
That was exceptional.
All we're trying to do here is mitigate the typical flooding that we've seen over the last, how many years that take place every 5 years or so. So Pete, Mark, I'm asking you, what is the typical path of floodwaters in the normal, quote, end quote, flood?
If I could preface that with just a couple of statistics that probably a lot of people in the room are aware of, but maybe not everybody. If you look at the flood gauge at Black Earth,
Yep.
been there since 1954.
Yep.
There have been, the mean flow on any given day is like 30 to 50 cubic feet per second. The average flood back in like 93 or whatever, was running around 1,100, 1,200 cubic feet per second. There have been 2 instances since 1954 where that flow has reached 1,700 cubic feet per second, and that was 1954 and 2001. This last flood was, and some people called 2001 a 100-year flood. I said, no, it's probably not. But in this last flood, the flow was 3,300 cubic feet per second, almost twice of 2001. So yeah, this was an exceptional event. The floodplain map shows the intersection of Bridge and 4th as remaining dry during a 100-year flood. On August 21st, there were boats having a hard time going upstream at that intersection because the flow was so great. It was truly exceptional, but at least in our neighborhood, down around State Street, the normal flow, even in 2001, was going down the street. What is blue in the flood fringe right now, according to that map. This map is maybe slightly more accurate than the first map that was adopted back in 1981, which showed a 3-foot differential from one side of the street to the other, as the water's going perpendicular to that differential, which makes no sense whatsoever. But nonetheless, like in that neighborhood, water flows right down State Street. It flows around the Noggle House and inundates the Noggle House. Ours remains pretty much dry. In some previous floods, we've had good luck protecting those properties on East Hudson by doing a massive amount of sandbagging along Kramer Street and channeling that water away from especially those 3 houses and the Booth House, channeling it back to the east into the main channel. Now that's taken a tremendous amount of labor, and this time, of course, sandbagging was fruitless.
But my question is this the normal flow of water for the typical flood, Pete?
Where the floodway is shown on that map?
Yeah.
No. It's, as I said, the normal water flows down State Street.
All right, but,
It
And-
usually comes behind like Joan DeRaker's house. It
Yeah.
cuts the creek right there, it comes across that field, kind of where,
Where?
I don't know who lives there now, the new couple that live across the street from Dick and Sharon. it kind of encircles their house and then comes over into our big yard and then off back into the road. Up until now, we've really never had our house encircled with water, up until this last one.
But you've had water in the basement.
Only because the water table came up higher
So
than
high from the ground.
Okay.
And 2001 was the only time we've had water in the basement.
Well, 2001, it had not been for all that sandbagging in front of our house and by side of our house.
Mhm.
It would have gone right through our house then too.
Yes, it absolutely would have.
And it did go through mine.
And it went right through yours, yeah.
Yeah.
Now keep in mind that they may at some point recommend ditching
Mhm.
to avoid having the water run down State Street.
Mhm. I think well, that's not gonna avoid having water go down State Street. When it's that high, you're gonna fill that ditch. And then it's still gonna cover State Street. You will never get it to stay out of State Street unless you elevate State Street at least 4 feet.
Mark, what's your thoughts on all
Flood
this?
again.
That's been part of the engineer's
Yeah.
discussion for a long-term mitigation plan is the possibility of 3 bridges or 2 new bridges and an additional bridge. But
Well, yeah, one thing that,
Well, wait, let Mark finish.
sorry, Mark.
his mitigation plan is long-term. These are not things that can happen this year. I believe his view with this is a first step to work towards that.
Yeah, we're not gonna accomplish flood mitigation just with the purchase of these 7. This is a start.
No. You do have constrictions at the 2 bridges that you have now. I think the State Street Bridge was built in like 1950.
Yep.
And the Bridge Street Bridge, well, when that was a truss bridge, it provided a lot less resistance to the flow of water. When the new bridge was built, it was built with a center pier, which the old bridge did not have. And things hang up on that, and I'm sure Mark would agree that they're not a whole lot of fun to fish out of there.
Well, we're talking billions, Pete.
Oh, yeah.
Start replacing those bridges.
Well, that bridge was poorly engineered to begin with.
No question.
The abutments on the ends were built inside of the old abutments, further narrowing the bridge.
Yeah. But their attempt here is to try and move water
Yeah.
around to the north side of the village, taking pressure off those bridges.
If you were to dig a large ditch where the floodway is shown there, yeah, you'd help relieve pressure on those bridges. But you would still have water going down State Street.
Yeah. We don't have all the answers to this thing.
Yeah.
This is just proposed as an initial step toward a long-term plan.
Yep.
That doesn't mean in future application periods, we can't come in and purchase more homes. But we simply don't know what the dollar impact to the village is going to be right now. And so both the consultant and the engineer are saying, take it slow.
I think purchasing those properties in the Hudson Kramer area makes a lot of sense, because we do put a heck of a lot of effort into protecting those houses in a normal flood. Also, the house to the south of us, which we have sandbagged very heavily every flood in the past. And we kept water out of it, except for when some jerk in a truck drove down the street and created a lake of water house has never been adequately protected. Our house didn't need protecting until this last flood. And we've, you know, we're fortunate, we've been able to recover from that.
So, I mean, you already know that most of those people in the Hudson, the Crano area are not gonna take the buyout because they're living in their homes. So, are you, I'm looking, we're not looking for a buyout. I'm thinking of the Passages, who are a family of four, or, you know, 4 kids, new house, I mean, young couple. They've been the Owens, or, the Wellses, who have, you know, young family, you know, these people that need this,
We aren't saying they don't need it,
but they deserve it.
no question, no
So
question.
you already know that these other homes aren't gonna take this, is what I'm saying.
No, we
Gary.
don't, no, we don't.
Okay, Denise, you're gonna tell me you don't know Denise? I
Jimmy
know you know
knows.
Denise is not, cause she got a lawyer to do what she's doing.
Yeah, I have not talked to
So-
these people, but this is a recommendation from our flood consultant and our village engineer, that we proceed in this manner.
Okay,
Now, there's no question, there are deserving people that are being omitted from this.
yeah, I
But-
feel like you're admitting the people that need it the most, because you know then the village will have to pay for that.
Well, you're right.
Yeah.
Gee, that's the whole point of what I've been saying here. We have to be very conservative with what we purchase, and that's what our consultant and our engineer are saying to us. There are a lot of other taxpayers to consider here. Yes.
We were deemed substantially damaged, so 50% or more, right?
Yep.
So it's my understanding if we're not a part of the buyout, we have to rebuild here. Any damage that happens after that, then we're out of luck. Because we've reached that 50%, you get nothing after that. Is that not true?
My understanding is, the only way, because you're in the flood fringe, the only way for you to rebuild is to become compliant with the ordinance.
Right.
And so
But if
once
we-
you're compliant with that ordinance, as long as you stay that way, then even if any more damage you have does not add up, or you don't even get a substantial damage estimate.
Because you'll be
Because
taking
you're already
yourself
out,
out of the floodplain. Right.
Right, so.
you have to comply with the ordinance, is what it says.
I build
You've
up.
already complied with the ordinance, it doesn't affect you at all. It's the
So
people that
if I
haven't.
build up, let's say they put a crawl space under there, crawl space gets washed out.
As long as the crawl space
I'm
is above the base flood elevation. If it's below, then you didn't comply.
Right, but
which-
if I comply,
Right.
it still gets washed out. I get no assistance, I get no anything then, I'm out, because I've reached that 50%.
No, it has nothing to do with it. You're not part of that 50% anymore because now you've complied by building out of the floodplain.
So it starts over then, because my understanding.
It doesn't
is that-
start over, it doesn't do anything. You are not in the floodplain anymore, so it doesn't apply to you at all. It's like someone that lives across town that gets damaged.
So
They
I'm
weren't
done.
in the floodplain, so they don't have the 50%.
So even if that crawl space, I'm done, that's it, I'm out of the, I'm over 50%.
Correct. If you built
I
it,
get nothing after
if you
that
built
I
it to
rebuild.
conform with the ordinance,
And
then
I'm gonna have to rebuild if I don't get bought out. So then if I get damaged again, at that point, I would have to walk away.
but if you got damage again, it wouldn't be, there's no substantial damage issues at all about there that you can or cannot do it. Then it'll be strictly a decision on your part whether you wanted to rebuild or not.
But
Because you're
ultimately,
complying with the
You wouldn't
ordinance.
have insurance. I wouldn't have any flood insurance for the flood damage that would take that crawl space.
You
out.
could get flood insurance, you can get flood insurance if you're not in the floodplain. It's cheaper. And that's one of the points that we've been telling, I know I've mentioned in the meetings already a couple times, that if you do elevate your house and pull it out of the floodplain, your flood insurance is cheaper. That's what we've been told by,
Right, no, I
Right,
understand that
yeah.
part, but I thought I also read that once you reach substantially damaged, you get no help, you get no.
correct,
nothing.
correct. If you don't do anything, if you're at the, say someone is below, okay, let me give you an example. Someone's 45%, so they're not substantially damaged. So they don't have to comply with the ordinance, because they're still grandfathered in. So they repair everything. And something happens and they get 6% damaged, then they can't. but you've already complied with it, you've pulled out, so it doesn't keep adding up on you anymore.
He's elevated, so he's out of the flood.
He's out of the
I'm elevated
floodplain.
out of it, but flood damage can still happen.
Correct, yeah, flood damage can happen anywhere.
And if that property, it was my understanding when I read this, it's been a while now, but once that property is 50% or more substantially damaged, then there's no assistance, you don't get any help after that.
Not if your substantial damage doesn't count anymore because you're out of the floodplain.
So your
That's what we've been
property
told, is once you're out of the floodplain, so that substantial damage, whether you were 50% or not, is not gonna apply to anything for any future damage, as long as you are still complying with the ordinance.
Here's
As
the-
long as
here-
he's elevated.
Here's the
Correct.
Use the
big,
term.
Well,
here's the big
compliance
picture
to
question.
accurate.
What does force us elevating do to all the surrounding properties? This is what we have to keep in mind moving forward, right? So it's decisions in the past that have come back to haunt us now. That's why what makes sense for the village makes sense for the village, you know? I mean, they might not be floodway, but having them elevate is going, what happens to Bartlett's home? What happens to passages across the street? I mean, where does that water go? I mean, since this list is not exclusive to floodway, I mean, why isn't it in the best interest of the village to force us a buyout, to make sure that nobody else's property get damaged moving
For the very
forward?
reason I stated from the beginning. We hired a consultant and we retained our engineering firm. They've recommended this plan. We're not bailing people out.
But when you
We're buying
present,
out.
when we presented this plan, you said it says on the floodway for flood mitigation plan, but this is not exclusive to the floodway. For instance, Frank Wolf's place is in the floodway and he's not
Poor
included
use of
in
terms.
this.
Poor
Well, it
use
is a
of
poor
terms.
use of terms and this is our decision as a board tonight, right? To approve or not approve this recommendation. And I wanna see additional names included in that alternate list.
We can do that.
I have 3 in particular that I would like to see included,
We
you
can
know?
do that, Natalie. We can come back if people on the A list don't accept, let's say we've got 2 people that don't accept the buyout, let's say we got 4 people. We can come back and revisit that alternate list because those alternates are not getting a letter offering a buyout. They're not getting a letter. It's only the people, those 7 people on that top list.
And why 7?
Because the
That's what they
consultant and the engineer recommended it.
I guess I'm not gonna feel comfortable approving this unless we include those alternates at this time, because I think they should be on this list, and if there's ones on list A that aren't gonna do it, then we should have everybody that is questionable close to the floodway,
Well, I
has an
think
outbuilding in the floodway.
If
I mean,
we're
this
going to
is just a
If we're going
recommendation.
to expand the alternate list, we'll involve our consultant and our village engineer. We'll involve them, and we'll bring it back to the board. The question tonight is, folks, we have a recommendation from Dale Clemmy, our flood consultant, and from Brian Berquist, our engineer with Town and Country, to offer a buyout to these 7 parcels.
I'm gonna make it a motion to approve if we can amend it to include 3 additional addresses, 207 East Hudson, 118 East Hudson, and 118 Curtis Street to the B list of alternates.
I have a question, aren't there 8 names on the top?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention it, there's
Not
8 names
seven?
on here, not 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I would implore the rest of this board to give it some consideration here. What are we doing? We're just adding them to an alternate list as a second option.
Does that 3 solve everything?
No, but that's my, that's
know,
my
I
I know,
motion.
but I'm just saying,
I don't
It's
see.
all the properties that are questionable by looking at that floodway. I've looked at this floodway since August, and it's all an interpretation, and whether their outbuildings are on there, or their primary residence, apparently that's not inclusive to this list. So, Those are the three in particular that I can look at and know that are in the,
Okay.
close to the floodway.
I don't see a problem with what you're proposing, adding those three to the alternate list. They will be subject to approval and recommendation by our flood consultant and our village engineer. But I don't see any problem adding those, Natalie.
That was a motion, right,
That is a
Natalie?
motion
So
on
then we
Natalie's.
need a second to discuss this.
Second. Second by Les.
Yes, okay.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion on Natalie's motion. The motion is that we extend a buyout proposal to those 8 on that top list. Peter?
I'm waiting for you to say that, but I'm
Top
asking to say
list,
something.
and that if one or more choose not to be involved in the program, we would then go to the B list. And I would just add that we will involve our consultants in that process before selecting the properties on the B list.
See, I feel like that's a cop-out. I named, my motion included three specific properties.
Why did we vote to retain these people in the first place?
My motion
If we're gonna
included
do
3
it-
specific properties. That's the motion on the floor.
All right, I'm gonna encourage the board to vote against that motion unless it includes review by our flood consultant and village engineer.
Can they be at the next meeting?
Yes.
I don't think unless board members have the expertise to make all decisions. And I agree, I second the motion to add names to the alternate list. But I don't think we should be the ones that are picking those properties.
That's right.
I would amend my motion, but in stating that those 3 particular properties I want brought to the village engineer.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I don't want to just go into another meeting and pick 3 more that,
No, we can give them 10 more.
Absolutely. No,
You give them any more.
I agree with that. So Natalie is amending her motion to include a review by the flood consultant and the village engineer. Les, are you
Yes.
amending your second? Is there discussion?
Can I do a clarification? 118 Curtis was discussed by our floodplain consultant and our engineer and by us. It would not be covered by FEMA
why?
because it's not in the floodplain, and they won't cover something like that. The house
So
itself.
now will an elevation certificate trump that, like it's trumped everything
If they can prove
from
they're in the
past?
floodplain, right, but
They've
that's,
been paying
we
flood
specifically
insurance for
asked about.
25 years.
Natalie, we specifically asked about that property.
Okay,
That's
I
why-
just think from the beginning, as we were doing these assessments, that the elevation certificate trumps all, so if they can prove they're in the floodplain.
Right, I'm not arguing that at all. If they can prove that, that changes the whole thing, but right now, the information we have is that they are not in, the house is not in the floodplain. And so it will not be covered by FEMA. That's what we were told flat out, because we had asked about that property specifically.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. All right, moving on. From committee.
I think you should encourage the engineers to actually produce a map that reflects where the water goes as opposed to where the map says it goes, because we know from previous experience that the map is not accurate.
We will have the village engineer and our flood consultant in future meetings.
Because I think you guys gotta understand it, I mean, maybe understand, I don't know, but we've been out of these houses since August. I'm paying rent and mortgage, which, you know, that's fun. And we've been waiting all this time, thinking, okay, there might be a buyout possible, whatever, and then we wait months, find out there isn't. Tempers are gonna get a little heated, and then like here, you're going by a faulty map, basically, because that map's wrong. We were out of the flood, we had to get a certificate to prove we were So the fact that they're using a bad map is really infuriating, because get an updated map, get the correct records.
Shouldn't that have been step number one, to make sure that map was the most accurate map?
We don't make the map.
That's like,
We don't.
We don't make the map.
I know, but
But
can't,
we
What about the one
interpret
at the
the
Black
map.
Earth Village Hall? They have a huge map
There has-
that's
there has
got
to be-
where the water was.
get them updated or something, but just the fact that they're going off a bad map is really, that's frustrating, because I'm living in Mount Horton paying more for rent than I was for house payments, and we're sitting here waiting to see if we can build, we can't build, what are we gonna do? If we do build, get flooded out again, we're screwed, whatever, but, I mean, we're just sitting here in limbo this whole time, and it's not a lot of fun. It's like, it'd be nice to see them using correct records, and, you know, I know it takes time, but it'd be nice if it moved a little bit faster and we knew things were being done with the correct records.
Well, yeah, I would comment that it's a FEMA map and it's FEMA money, and whether it's right or wrong. I personally have asked about the Wells property numerous times and have been told that it's not in the floodplain, therefore we can't use FEMA buyout money to do anything with it, which I hate as much as anybody, but.
That's why we kept asking, because we kept trying to find a way.
Are we done with the flood stuff now? Is it, are we,
Well, we're moving on to our other agenda items now.
that's what I mean.
You can stay for announcements at the end.
But I was gonna say, I have a question, this
Yeah.
will be done. When can we take a house down, if that was what we were gonna do?
Sue?
Cause I thought we
Anytime.
had to wait for that.
As far as I know, anytime.
Well, we had, Tracy, I know, had talked to you guys and said, if you could wait till decisions made, because we didn't know what houses would be included in this
Right,
list.
Right.
And so we didn't want people to get ahead of things.
Oh, okay.
But if you're not in the list and Tracy has approved your permit, you're good.
No, then it's
No,
over. It's-
he did not approve.
Well,
He
then,
just kept it.
I think Tracy was waiting to see this
Yeah,
list
yeah.
too, because he didn't want
It's
anybody,
over
so,
60% damage, so.
right,
Yeah.
so just
Okay.
talk with Tracy.
Yep,
And
Yep.
and there was no sense in filling up the.
Okay, okay, thank you.
There's no sense.
Sorry, we'll.
Yep.
Sorry.
Peter, my
No,
permit's
you're fine.
been approved for demo. Very
Yep,
much.
I know Tracy was trying to make sure people at least waited till we got a list, just to make sure, because he didn't want anybody to do something they would regret later.
Okay, folks, we're moving on to committees, personnel. I have nothing. Public Works, nothing for Ray. Parks and Rec,
Nothing?
nothing from Jerry. Public Protection and Ordinance, we have
Yes, we have a
proposed,
piece of paper.
proposed ordinance prepared by Village Attorney Bill Cole, an ordinance regulating the use of all-terrain and utility terrain vehicles.
He proposes routes to be closed from sunset to sunrise,
Yes.
so like right now at 4:30 you'd be done.
That's kind of a,
That's not how none of the villages are doing this.
So, when Bill drafted this, did he use state guidelines?
I'm not sure. What I did is I sent him the minutes from the public protection meeting, and I told him to draft an ordinance because it was gonna be way too complicated to just throw together and have him look at it. So, I had him draft the ordinance, and I told him about the concern about the permits. And then this is what came back.
Well,
I mean,
I-
can't.
What did you have?
Say that we should follow by those kind of things.
well, on E number 3 is
Right.
what I have there. This is just some of the stuff, I mean,
What did your committee recommend?
we just recommended, I believe, 9 o'clock, wasn't it? 9 to 9?
Okay.
Number 2 on there too, if you could explain that to me, under E.
They can't
I mean,
park.
I can't understand it myself. It says are not allowed to park in or along any roadway or alleyway within the village. We said that they could park on the roads.
Right. Otherwise, they can't stop. It doesn't make no sense. You bring people in to use,
Okay,
to go to the cafe, to go to,
what else?
I didn't see anything else different, just
Okay.
those two.
Then you should probably table it or postpone it, and then we'll send the changes to Bill.
Is there a motion to postpone to the next meeting?
motion.
By Scott,
What's second?
second by Jeff. Discussion.
We should are those all the changes that are gonna be made?
I'll go through it, I don't know.
Because otherwise,
A lot of
sending it to
these,
him will be,
a lot of these that he made up, like use the headlamps and stuff like that, I don't know why we need to have that in our ordinances when that's a rule and regulation set by the DNR. To be on the roadways, I think we might have been a little more vague than he wants it to be, but I mean, don't you have to go by the laws of the state, just like you do driving a car? We don't need ordinances on letting cars in our
Jeff,
village.
but what about, do the DNR rules apply to village streets? That's what I'm wondering, if he put
There's-
it in there
there's-
because of that.
Yeah, they do, they
do?
actually do
Okay.
have,
to public to that.
And I,
they're up north all over the place and everything else, they're running roads and
I
down
didn't
at
know, I
the,
didn't know if DNR rules apply to that.
I thought
pretty
too
much
it would be
approved it to
simplified.
follow the guidelines
Yeah.
of this.
right.
Right. And maybe that should be in the ordinance, you know, I mean, simply stated, and then we wouldn't have to have all the,
I just didn't. think we
because
needed-
then when they change a rule in there, we're not required to change an ordinance.
So question, if we do the time from 9 to 9, that means in the summer you can't be on it before 9 AM? We don't want that. Hey, Pearson.
I don't remember.
It was a gripe in Arena that farmers
Yes,
couldn't come to
Springs Day.
breakfast
Okay.
or something.
So if looking at the times, we don't want it closed from 9 to 9. In the summer, we got daylight already at 4:30, 5 o'clock. Some people might be out. We don't want to keep them off of their.
You mean in the morning?
Yeah.
We've thought 9 o'clock, so you're not disturbing people.
Didn't we say 7 o'clock? Because that's when construction is supposed to start in town.
That's when our sound
Yeah,
ordinance
our
comes
sound
into play.
is 7
yeah.
to 7.
Noise
I mean,
ordinance.
as a snowmobile.
7 to 10.
7 to 9 or 10.
Yes.
I think you need to call a new public protection
There you go. Scott.
meeting and grind this thing out.
And then-
Get together with Sue.
So this would be instead of the snowmobile ordinance or in addition to?
in addition
In
to,
addition
because I thought it would be like an amendment to the snowmobile ordinance, just kind of add a few things there. But
Jeff, we need to call a meeting.
We'll call a meeting.
Okay. All right. Is there then a motion to postpone this to a future meeting?
we already have a motion and a
We did.
second.
Okay. So all we have to do is vote on it.
Yes.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. The motion is carried. Finance, payment of bills.
Did we buy a new computer?
We are having some installed, they were budgeted. We're getting a server, my computer is right now the server. What we're doing is getting a dedicated server because my computer can't handle it. And Tara's getting a new computer, and we're getting a new computer for the fire department.
And then we're paying Chuck Non for Lake Marion, is that an old bill?
That was to create the, well, it was from last fall, that was to create the as-is for the Lake Marion Trail that should have been done a year and a half ago. The DNR was requiring.
Motion paid bill. Motion by Les.
Second.
Second by Jeff. Discussion. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed by the same sign, that motion is carried. Are there any announcements? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
By Les. By Scott. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion is carried.